They laughed not because it was funny, but because it was small. A step here, a quiet move there, nothing loud, nothing worth clapping for. Just tiny shifts that looked meaningless to the outside world and people. They love underestimating what they don't understand. See, the world is addicted to big moments, loud wins, overnight success. They don't see the silence behind strategy, the patience behind power. Every move you made, they called it nothing. Every step forward, they called it slow. But what they never realized is that small moves aren't weak. They're calculated. While they were busy judging the surface, something deeper was unfolding. A pattern, a direction, a plan that didn't need approval, didn't need noise. Because real control doesn't scream, it waits. And the funny thing is, the same people who mocked the beginning are always the most confused when everything suddenly makes sense. Silence has a strange way of making people uncomfortable. If there's no noise, no announcement, no constant display of progress, they assume nothing is happening. They measure effort by volume, not by direction. So when you move quietly, when you choose not to broadcast every step, they write you off. They call it a lack of ambition, a lack of confidence, a lack of anything worth noticing. What they don't understand is that silence is not empty. It's controlled. Every quiet move carries intention. It's not rushed, not desperate, not made for approval. It's calculated. When you move without needing validation, you remove distraction. There's no pressure to impress, no need to prove anything in the moment. You're not reacting to opinions, you're building something beneath them. And while they're busy watching for something flashy, something immediate, you're placing pieces exactly where they need to be. People expect progress to be obvious. They want to see the grind, hear the struggle, witness every step so they can decide whether it's worthy. But real progress doesn't perform. It doesn't ask for attention. It develops in the background, in the decisions nobody sees, in the discipline nobody applauds. That's why it's dangerous. Because by the time it becomes visible, it's already too late to stop. A silent move doesn't mean a weak move. It means precise. It means you've thought it through enough that you don't need noise to support it. You're not guessing, you're placing. Every action connects to another, even if no one else can see the pattern yet. And that's the part people miss. They judge individual moves, not the sequence. They laugh at a single step because they can't imagine where it leads. There's power in being overlooked. When no one is paying attention, you're free. Free to experiment, free to adjust, free to grow without interference. No expectations to meet, no spotlight to perform under. While others are busy maintaining an image, you're building something real. Something that doesn't collapse the moment attention shifts. And when the impact finally shows, it feels sudden to them, like it came out of nowhere. One moment you were invisible, the next you're undeniable. They call it luck, timing, coincidence. Anything but what it really is. They don't connect the outcome to the quiet work because they never saw it. They never valued it. To them, silence meant nothing was happening. But silence was where everything was happening. Every adjustment, every lesson, every improvement took place away from their noise. You didn't need their acknowledgement to continue, and that's what made it work. Because once you rely on attention, you start performing instead of progressing. You start chasing reactions instead of results. Silent moves don't seek approval, they build leverage. They stack slowly, carefully, until the position shifts completely. And by the time anyone notices, the balance is already gone, the advantage already secured, the outcome already decided. Being underestimated feels like a disadvantage at first, like something that limits you before you even begin. People talk to you like they already know your limits. They assign you a role in their mind, a small one, and then they treat that assumption as fact. It can feel like you're being placed in a box you never agreed to, defined by people who haven't seen what you're capable of. But there's a strange advantage hidden inside that situation. Something most people never notice because they're too busy reacting emotionally to it. When people underestimate you, they stop watching you closely. They stop preparing for what you might actually become. Their attention shifts elsewhere, toward those they believe are more important, more dangerous, more relevant. That shift creates space. Space to move without interruption. Space to grow without resistance. Space to build without being constantly questioned or corrected. And that space is where real transformation happens. Expectation is a form of pressure. When people expect great things from you too early, they start measuring every step. Every mistake becomes visible. Every delay becomes a disappointment. But when they expect nothing, you are free from that weight. You are not forced to perform at a level you haven't reached yet. You are allowed to develop without being judged against a standard you didn't set. Underestimation also creates a psychological blind spot in others. They believe they already understand your ceiling, so they don't bother to reconsider it. They assume consistency in your limits. That assumption becomes their weakness, because while they are fixed in their perception of you, you are not fixed in reality. You are evolving, shifting, improving in ways they refuse to calculate. There is something powerful about being overlooked in moments that matter. When your progress doesn't match their expectations, they dismiss it as temporary. When your effort doesn't fit their narrative, they ignore it. That dismissal gives you time. Time to refine what they are not taking seriously. Time to strengthen what they are not respecting. Time to move in directions they are not tracking. And the most interesting part is how underestimation affects their reaction to your growth. When the results finally appear, they struggle to connect them to your journey. Because in their mind, there was no journey worth tracking. They only register the outcome, not the process. So the result feels sudden, almost disconnected from logic, even though it was built step by step in the exact space they weren't paying attention to. People often think respect is required for success. In reality, being underestimated can sometimes be more useful than being respected too early. Respect can bring pressure, expectations, interference. Underestimation brings distance, and distance creates freedom. Freedom to fail quietly. Freedom to adjust without scrutiny. Freedom to continue without explanation. The mistake others make is assuming visibility equals importance. They think the loudest presence is the strongest one, so they focus on what demands attention, not on what quietly accumulates strength. Meanwhile, what they ignore is often the thing that is growing without interruption, without resistance, without interference shaping its direction. Being underestimated is not the absence of recognition. It is the absence of interference, and in that absence, things develop differently. Stronger, sharper, more intentional. While others are busy proving themselves in front of an audience, something overlooked is learning how to operate without one. Patience is not waiting. It is control. Most people confuse it with delay, as if nothing is happening until the result appears. But patience is not passive. It is active restraint. It is the discipline of holding yourself back. When everything inside you wants speed, recognition, and immediate proof. That is where most people fail. They want results that match their emotions, not their timeline. The mind is impatient by default. It wants confirmation that effort is working. It wants visible proof that time is not being wasted. When that proof doesn't appear quickly, doubt enters. And once doubt enters, decisions change. People start rushing, adjusting too early, abandoning systems that were never meant to show immediate outcomes. They confuse silence with failure, and in that confusion, they destroy their own progress. Patience creates distance between impulse and action. That distance is where intelligence grows. Without it, every decision is emotional. Every step becomes a reaction. But with patience, there is space to observe, calculate, and refine. You begin to see patterns instead of moments. You stop responding to every fluctuation and start focusing on direction instead of speed. What most people don't understand is that real strength develops in delay. Anything valuable takes time not because it is slow, but because it is being formed correctly. Pressure builds structure. Repetition builds stability. Time removes weakness that urgency would otherwise ignore. If something is rushed, cracks are hidden. If something is allowed to develop, those cracks are exposed and fixed before they matter. Patience also filters people. It separates those who are serious from those who are emotional. Many start with energy, but only a few continue when nothing is visible. The early stage is always the easiest because motivation is still loud. But as silence stretches, motivation fades, and only discipline remains. That is the point where most stop, not because they failed, but because they could not tolerate the absence of instant feedback. There is a strange clarity that comes with waiting without panic. You begin to understand that time is not your enemy. It is part of the process. Every delay is not a blockage, but a layer being added. Every slow phase is not empty, it is foundational. And while others rush to reach visibility, patience builds invisibility first, because what is strong does not need early exposure. Impatience makes people predictable. They react quickly. They change direction often. They abandon systems too early. Patience makes you unreadable. No one can determine your next step because you are not moving based on emotion. You are moving based on timing. And timing is something others cannot influence when you control it internally. The hardest part of patience is not waiting for results, but continuing without reassurance. There is no applause during construction, no recognition during repetition, no acknowledgement during correction. It is a private process, and that privacy is what makes it powerful. Because when nobody is watching, you are not performing, you are building. People often assume speed is power, but speed without direction collapses quickly. What looks fast can still be unstable. What looks slow can be structurally unbreakable. Patience ensures that nothing is left unfinished. Nothing is half-formed. Nothing is rushed into existence before it is ready to hold weight. And over time, something changes. What once felt like waiting becomes positioning. What once felt like delay becomes preparation. What once felt like silence becomes control. The outcome does not arrive suddenly. It emerges from a process that never needed urgency to prove its validity. Attention is the most distracting currency in any system. People believe that being seen is the same as being powerful. That recognition is proof of value. That visibility automatically means progress. But attention has a cost most don't calculate. The moment you start chasing it, you stop controlling your direction. You begin adjusting yourself to fit perception instead of purpose. And that shift changes everything without you noticing it at first. When strategy is replaced by attention, decisions stop being private. They become performances. Every move is made with an audience in mind, even if no one is watching yet. That imagined audience starts influencing choices. What should have been calculated becomes emotional. What should have been deliberate becomes reactive. The focus shifts from building something real to making something look real. Attention creates pressure to maintain an image. Once people notice you, they expect consistency in how they perceive you. That expectation becomes a trap. You start managing opinions instead of managing progress. You become careful not because you are improving, but because you are being observed. An observation changes behavior in subtle but dangerous ways. It makes you hesitate where you should move freely. The strongest systems are not built under observation. They are built in silence, where decisions are not influenced by reaction. Without attention, there is no need to explain, justify, or defend every step. There is only execution, and execution without interference is cleaner, sharper, and more aligned with long-term outcomes. Nothing is distorted by the need for approval. Attention also fragments focus. When too many eyes are on something, too many opinions follow. Each opinion pulls in a different direction. Even if they are not acted on directly, they still create noise in decision-making. That noise weakens clarity, and without clarity, strategy becomes unstable. What should have been a straight path turns into constant adjustment based on external input. There is also a hidden dependency that grows with attention. The more people notice your actions, the more you begin to rely on their reactions as feedback. Silence starts to feel like absence of progress. Approval starts to feel like validation of direction. This dependency is subtle, but it slowly replaces internal judgment with external measurement. And once that happens, control is no longer fully yours. What most people fail to see is that attention is not proof of importance. It is simply distribution. It spreads focus, divides energy, and exposes systems before they are complete. Some things are not meant to be seen during construction. Exposure too early weakens structure. It invites interpretation before completion, and interpretation often replaces truth with assumption. When attention is removed, something different happens. The mind stops performing and starts building. There is no need to impress, no need to explain, no need to manage perception. Every action becomes direct. Every decision becomes cleaner. The absence of observation creates space for depth, and depth is where real advantage forms. People who rely on attention often peak early because they are rewarded for visibility, not substance. But systems built without attention develop differently. They grow without distortion. They are not shaped by reaction, but by intention. And when they finally become visible, they do not require explanation. They are already complete in structure, not in appearance. And that is where the real shift happens, when what was built away from attention enters a space that never influenced its formation, and the reaction is no longer control but realization. Small actions are the most misunderstood force in progress. People dismiss them because they don't create immediate disruption. They don't look impressive. They don't demand attention. They don't force reaction. So they get ignored, overlooked, and underestimated. But what people fail to understand is that major outcomes are rarely born from single large actions. They are built from repeated small ones that compound in silence. The mind struggles to respect small steps because it is trained to look for impact that is visible right away. If something doesn't change the environment instantly, it is considered insignificant. But systems don't work on instant impact. They work on accumulation, and accumulation is never dramatic in the beginning. It is slow, repetitive, and often boring to those who are watching from the outside. Small actions create direction long before they create results. A single step means nothing on its own, but repeated consistently, it starts forming a path. That path is not visible at first, but it exists, and once a path is formed, every new action becomes easier to align. Momentum is not created through intensity. It is created through continuity. Most people fail not because they don't act, but because they stop valuing what feels small. They underestimate the importance of repetition. They believe progress must feel significant every time it happens. So when effort feels ordinary, they assume it is not working. That assumption becomes a barrier. It causes unnecessary changes, unnecessary resets, unnecessary abandonment of systems that were actually working. Small actions also build resistance to failure. When something is done in small increments, mistakes are easier to absorb. There is less risk, less pressure, less emotional weight attached to each attempt. That allows learning to happen faster without collapse. Large actions demand perfection. Small actions allow correction, and correction is what creates stability over time. There is also something powerful about consistency that looks meaningless to others. When people cannot see immediate results, they assume nothing is happening. That assumption creates space, and in that space, repetition continues without interruption. What they ignore becomes what they are eventually forced to acknowledge, not because it changed suddenly, but because it was never stopped. Small actions also bypass resistance. The mind resists big changes because they feel overwhelming, but small steps feel manageable. They don't trigger hesitation in the same way. That is why most long-term transformations begin with actions that feel too simple to matter. Simplicity removes resistance, and once resistance is gone, movement becomes natural. Over time, these small actions begin to stack, not in a visible explosion, but in quiet layering. Each layer supports the next. Each repetition strengthens the foundation, and what starts as something invisible slowly becomes something undeniable. The shift is not sudden. It is gradual to the point where people only notice the outcome, never the process. The irony is that people respect results more than process, even though results are only the final form of process. They react to outcomes as if they appeared independently, without understanding the accumulation that created them. So when the result finally shows itself, it appears surprising to those who were not paying attention to the small actions that built it. Small actions are not about speed. They are about direction maintained over time. And when direction is preserved long enough without interruption, it becomes outcome without needing dramatic change at any single point of the journey. The endgame is never obvious while it is being built. Most people only recognize the game when it reaches its final stage, when the structure is already in place and the outcome is no longer flexible. Before that point, everything looks ordinary, even random. Moves seem disconnected, decisions seem unclear, and progress seems uneven. But that is because they are not looking at the full board. They are only reacting to isolated moments. In the beginning, nothing appears significant. Each step looks too small to matter, too simple to influence anything important. That is why people underestimate the early phase of any long process. They expect early clarity, early signals, early validation. But the endgame does not reveal itself at the start. It stays hidden behind repetition, delay, and quiet accumulation. What defines the endgame is not speed, but structure. Every move made earlier is not judged individually, but in relation to what it leads into. A single action means little without context, but in a connected system, every action becomes part of a chain. And that chain only makes sense when viewed from the final position backward. That is why most people fail to understand it while it is happening. The difference between those who understand the endgame and those who don't is perspective. One group reacts to what is visible now. The other builds for what will only make sense later. That shift in thinking changes everything. Because when you are focused on the present reaction, you adjust constantly. But when you are focused on the final structure, you stop overreacting to temporary noise. The endgame also rewards patience in disguise. Many decisions that seem unproductive in the moment only gain value later. A delay that felt like stagnation becomes preparation. A silence that felt like nothing becomes alignment. A setback that felt like interruption becomes redirection. But none of that is visible during the process. It only becomes clear when the structure is complete enough to explain its own logic. People often misjudge timing because they expect constant visible progress. They assume that if something is working, it must always look like movement. But some of the most important moves are still. They are not designed to show change immediately. They are designed to shift balance quietly. And balance is not something you see instantly. It is something you realize when everything starts aligning without effort. In the endgame, the value of early discipline becomes clear. Every small decision that was ignored by others starts to matter. Every moment of restraint, every moment of patience, every moment of consistency begins to connect into something larger. What looked like isolated effort becomes a structured outcome. Nothing was wasted, even if it looked unimportant at the time. The most powerful part of the endgame is that it does not need explanation. By the time it is visible, it explains itself. The structure is already complete, and the path that led there is no longer uncertain. What once required belief becomes reality. What once required trust becomes evidence, and what once looked invisible becomes unavoidable in its presence.